Before we start, I'd definitely like to acknowledge the generous support of Gowlings, obviously the sponsor of this theatre, for their continued support of this conference overall, and as well, on a personal note, as a supporter of the Mars Discovery District. So this afternoon, this panel will feature leaders from several world-class Ontario companies in medical devices, diagnostics, and healthcare IT who have achieved commercial success by a variety of models, including local growth, partnership, and acquisition. They will share their insights about their path to success and contributing factors in Ontario. So, with that, I'd like to introduce to you the moderator for this session, Ian Smith. Ian is the Director General of the National Research Council of Canada Institute for Biodiagnostics in Winnipeg. Research at the Institute focuses on the development and commercialization of medical devices for the non-invasive diagnosis of diseases. Over the years, it has started 10 companies with a current market value of $300 million. Exceptional achievement. Dr. Smith is dedicated to early detection and treatment of disease, using this knowledge to advance the state of medicine and the economy. In 2009, he was appointed the Officer of the Order of Canada for his leadership in the advancement, development, and commercialization of Canada's diagnostic technologies, notably magnetic resonance imaging and its applications in the field of healthcare. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ian Smith.
Thank you. Yep. Thanks a lot. Okay, the subject today is how to make our little companies into big companies. Canada is very good at starting little companies, but not so good at turning them into medium-sized and big companies. In fact, if you do a survey in Ontario of medical device companies, you might find about 250, 300 companies. If you limit it to companies with more than 50 employees, you're down under 100. So the goal of the spirit of the chat this afternoon is how do we do better? And the best way to describe that, I guess, is through examples. So we have 3 examples. And I'd like to say that for questions, we'd like to have those at the end after all the presenters have spoken so that we get our flow right. And now I will give you a short bio of our panelists. Our first panelist is Neil Godara. They're in order from your right to your left. Neil is a Research and Development Manager at Baylis Medical. He guides engineering operations, including biological and physics research, project conceptualization, medical method design, and market release strategies. That's just about everything. That's quite a portfolio. To advance the treatment of chronic pain, Baylis Medical and Kimberly-Clark Innovations incorporate several technologies, including radio frequency generators, internally water-cooled electrodes, and modular software platforms. Neil has over 30 published or pending patents in various disciplines, ranging from medical procedures to software design algorithms for novel medical designs. I don't know how to pronounce the name of this product of yours, Neil. Synergy? Synergy, with an I. It's an L. Yeah, Synergy. That's much better. Procedure for the treatment of chronic sacroiliac joint syndrome, the only proven treatment option for a debilitating condition that affects millions of people worldwide. So with that clumsy introduction, I would like to have Neil step up here and use this microphone. With apologies, I'm sure I know.
No worries.
Well, thank you, Ian, for that introduction. My voice is about half gone, so apologies if I don't make it all the way through. I might have one of my colleagues finish for me. It's a great honor to be here and speak to you today at the Discovery Conference. And I want to thank Bettina as well as Ian for the introduction. I'm going to speak to you today about Baylis Medical Company. We're an all-Canadian company based in Montreal, but with most of our operations here in Mississauga, just outside of Toronto by 20 minutes. And we're a homegrown story. We started as a local company in distribution, and I'll walk you through exactly how we grew to about 150 employees and some of the lessons we've learned from there, and hopefully some insights that I can pass along to the audience today. As I mentioned, Baylis Medical, just for some background, we have about 140 employees. About 100 of those are based here in Mississauga. We have about 40,000 square feet of space in Mississauga, half of that dedicated to manufacturing. We manufacture all our medical devices here. We employ about 60 manufacturing staff, including the ability to manufacture sterile pack products. So we've been insourcing, as a word we like to use, a lot of the technologies, and we're proud to bring in as many of the technologies from around the world and bring those in-house so that we can develop technologies more rapidly. And that's been one of our calling cards, is to bring in technology versus outsourcing it to third-party companies. We have our headquarters in Montreal, which mainly is there for sales, marketing, and distribution. And as you would imagine, for any medical device company, we're registered with all the pertinent regulatory agencies as well as with FDA QSR. Baylis Medical operates really in three distinct business units: distribution, pain management, and interventional cardiology and radiology. But it's really distribution that I wanted to start out with. That's really the first point I wanted to make, is that Baylis Medical, when we started in 1986, this is our 25th year, in fact, we started as a local importer of medical devices from around the world. So we didn't start as a medical device company. And the benefit of starting as a distribution company was twofold. One, it gave us access to a great amount of visibility to both hospitals, physicians, surgeons, and seeing the types of devices they were using, but also gave us a steady revenue stream, as steady as a distribution can give you. It's a bit cyclical in nature. But that started off slow, so we had 2, 3 employees running around the country importing very specialized medical devices, quite often in the fields of interventional pediatric cardiology, or interventional cardiology for adults as well. And as I mentioned, that exposure to these devices let us see, and being in the clinics gave us the experience to see what was working, what's not working, where are there opportunities to develop products. And in fact, it was that very opportunity that led us to our very first product. So this is fast forward now about 10 years. Now we're in about 1998 or so. And one of the products we were distributing was from a German company called OCE. And they were selling a wire that was used in cardiology, interventional cardiology applications. And some of the physicians here at SickKids, which is my second point I'll talk about, is the access to local talent being one of the key driving success stories for Ontario medtech sector. One of the challenges at SickKids was they were presented with infants that were born with a very rare condition called pulmonary atresia, and that's basically when the pulmonary valve, which is normally closed for all infants, but normally that opens after a couple of days. In about 3,000 to 5,000 infants around the world, that isn't the case, and when that happens, you get something called blue baby syndrome because the blood isn't properly oxygenated. So our physicians said, why don't you guys, ask OCE to go make us a wire that's specifically intended for these infants whose heart is about the size of your thumbnail versus doing open heart surgery. We said that's a great idea, so we approached, the German company. They said, it's a small market, we're not really interested, so, we're not really going to get into that market. So, being the Canadians that we are, we like to take small chances, and we said, okay, this is a great opportunity for us to get our feet wet. We took a small project. It's not a huge market, but it was something that no one else really was interested in doing. And for us, that's perfect, because one of the things that we've really focused on is reducing our risk in any of our product development. Because we're completely self-funded, we don't get into your really complex clinical trials or anything of that sort. To make a long story short, we developed this in conjunction with skills in the researchers here at SickKids, and that was absolutely fundamental for our ability to make a product that was meaningful. And the Nicotin wire, which is shown here, which is then subsequently used with the balloon to open up these infants' hearts, has become the gold standard for this condition around the world. And to this day, if a baby is born with this condition, we're usually on a plane the next day treating infants around the world. That's the story that makes everyone like us, and that's why we always start with that one. The idea of working with local researchers and taking small bets was critical to our success, as I alluded to. The reason why that was, the reason why that further made sense is that because it was a small bet, there's a couple of things. The R&D tax credit system allowed us to give us a stable source of income. We knew, if we spent this much, based on the shred system here in Ontario and Canada, we knew how much we could get back. That helped us finance it. A small bet also allowed us to go back to those cardiologists and say, okay, can we adopt or modify this technology for other applications? And that, in fact, led us to adult applications where we, are now the premier technology for left heart access, which electrophysiologists use if they're doing any work on the left side of the heart. So our technology is used there as well. So basically taking small steps to grow and not taking big steps, so to reduce the risk profile, access to top med tech skills with world-class research institutions and physicians and surgeons we have, and a secure R&D tax program are really the three things that allowed Baylis Medical to grow. And if there are small companies that can afford to grow in that process, it's worked for us, and I would recommend it to other companies as well. Thank you.
I hope you didn't let that clock scare you.
It did.
Oh, yeah, because we didn't start on time.
That's it.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Neil. That was great. And now we're going to turn to Don Plewes, and this is a story of academia to success and a generation of a lot of highly qualified people. Is this voice wrong in some way or other? Is it okay? It didn't sound like me to me, but anyway. That's because I hear the other way. Dr. Plewes is Professor Emeritus in the Department of Medical Biophysics at the University of Toronto and a consultant in imaging research at Sunnybrook Health Sciences Centre. His career has been dedicated to the physics of medical imaging. He has conducted research in X-ray, CT imaging, ultrasound, and magnetic resonance with clinical applications related to cardiovascular disease and cancer. He and his group have published in excess of 150 scientific papers and delivered over 250 presentations at international meetings. But what's most relevant to us today is one of his students started a company called Sentinelle Medical. Sentinelle Medical makes coils for MRI machines to do the imaging of the female breast. That company started as a newly graduated student and is now over 140 employees, marketing with the majors, to all the majors. And you know how hard that is to get your product into a big company, to be accepted according to all their standards and so on. So this they have done very well. So Don is going to tell us his story from Sunnybrook, and I guess end with the fantastic success of Sentinelle Medical. Don.
Thank you, Ian. So I'm really here to represent the members of this company that Ian is referring to, Sentinelle Medical. And I can sort of summarize the nascent history of the story, because there's very much a story that comes from the academic laboratory, finding an application for which there's a commercial opportunity and seeing it through to that commercial outcome with the success that I hopefully will explain to you. So this kind of summarizes the motivation of how we started this exercise. About 1995, I was involved very much in the area of doing magnetic resonance imaging of breast cancer, seeing if we could use MRI to better detect early breast cancer. We were particularly interested in looking at the use of MR in screening hereditary breast cancer patients that are at high risk, higher risk than the normal risk profile that the average woman would see in Canada. These patients have got about an 80 to 90% lifetime risk of getting breast cancer, as opposed to something more like about a 9 or 12% risk in the general population. To make a long story short, we did the study. It took us 12 years to do this study. We looked at several hundred women over the course of that 12-year period, did thousands of examinations, and you see here a chart of the sensitivity, that is your ability to see small breast cancers by MRI, by mammography, clinical breast examination, and ultrasound. And you can see that after that 12-year period that we were able to show that MRI has got a much higher sensitivity for detecting these early stage breast cancers than other imaging technologies currently in use. So this is a very exciting process. It took a long time to happen, but when we started this exercise in 1997, was actually started, we actually got funding to do this thing, there were so-called coils and RF technology, MRI technology available to do this, but I was not particularly happy with them. And this is an example of what I mean. These are images of so-called coils. They're essentially antennas that are put in the vicinity of the breast, the tissue we're interested in imaging, and they detect the NMR signal, which is subsequently used to make the picture. And they sort of have the general feature that it's a kind of one-size-fits-all geometry. They design a structure that's going to be good for all women and all conditions. And we knew that when we did that, we'd be sacrificing a lot of potential benefit that we could have if we could make coils adaptable to the particular body habitus of each patient. Furthermore, we needed to be able to sample tissue under MR guidance to get little pieces of tissue for histology, something that was difficult to do in many of these alternative offerings. So we at that point decided we should begin to embark upon our own program of trying to make better coils for this particular project we were doing. And we continued to do it over the course of many years. And after a lot of experimentation, this is what we ended up developing. It took us about 5 years and several iterations of this process. This is a coil that we developed in 2003. It integrated smoothly with the GE MRI system, which we're using and continue to use in Sunnybrook. And it was married to that system so that it was essentially a retrofit device, if you will, that would plug into the GE system, and did hundreds of cases with this, got a lot of experience, and found out that this was a very superior technology compared to what we could buy in the marketplace. So that set the stage for a foundation for a startup company. The clinical interest that we received when I gave presentations about this at international meetings suggested that there really was an opportunity for forming a small company. And I want to tell you how that came about. So the company is called Sentinelle Medical, and it was formed in 2004. Could we go back? I didn't mean to. There we go. There. We started in 2004, literally 3 people, the 3 founders and myself. In 2010, it grew to 150 people. And the way this was structured was that it would do cross-marketing agreements with the major vendors of MRI equipment, General Electric, Siemens, and Toshiba, which represent between them the majority of the MRI business around the world. We received FDA, ISO certification, Health Canada certification in 2006. In 2011, there's 13 separate products that this company makes, all fitting into this particular niche, and it's now sold essentially throughout the world. The real credit to this goes to these people here. The research started in my lab, and they were participants in that research as graduate students or engineers. And the young man on the left, Cameron Piron, is the person who is the president of the company. He has an unusual history that we may get into in the course of question and answers. He came from an entrepreneurial family, so he had the notion of startup companies and small businesses was very much in his blood. He was also a very good scientist and a good engineer. Chris Luganbill also worked with me at the time. We together built our first system, the image I just showed you there. And then mechanical engineer, a very inventive guy, good designer. Galcella, also a software engineer. All of them, we all worked together at this outset, and together started this ball rolling. So this is, in addition to the various systems that I showed you, images of different kinds of technologies for these different manufacturers. Sentinelle makes an image analysis system called Aegis. So this is a technology that's then used for taking the images that comes from MRI and analyzing them in a context that's specific to the detection and analysis of breast cancers, and improves and eases the interpretation of these rather complex tomographic images. And you see some examples of what these kinds of breast MRI images look like. More recently, the company's been able to venture in using some of the very similar technologies developed for breast applications for male and female pelvic imaging, so prostate imaging, transvaginal, transrectal applications. And so we've been able to use very much the same kinds of platforms to move into this area, and we're looking forward to getting into this business and are now venturing into this business as we speak. In parallel with that, there's an image analysis system for this prostate analysis that facilitates biopsy and image interpretation. In this case, you're looking at a prostate cancer. A third product that we're developing is a so-called navigation technology, and this is a technique that allows us to fuse ultrasound images and MRI images, or CT images and MRI images, into a kind of aligned data set that allows us to look at one kind of contrast in comparison to a different kind of contrast and help our ability to interpret different disease entities. So we're looking at this, this is a work in progress, and it's currently been applied to liver and prostate, and we're looking at the applications to breast as well. So what was our approach to making this all happen? So if we could just go back, you just advanced me there, don't go back, there we go. So We came from an academic laboratory. It's Sunnybrook Health Sciences Center. This is a large hospital. It has a large research enterprise. It's essentially there for the purpose of training graduate students, postdoctoral fellows, doing publicly funded research. You can see the population of individuals. We do X-ray imaging, MR, ultrasound. We do basic and applied research. And so we realized that in order to take some of these ideas that we had, we wanted to create an incubator space. So we and our imaging research group, our scientists got together, we raised some money, was able to rent some additional space down the street from us, not too far away, about 2 kilometers away, top floor or 6th floor of an office building. You see it there, it's on Yonge Street. And we used this essentially as a space that would take ideas that we developed in the academic environment and put them, in a sense, isolate them in this incubator space where there was not any potential conflicts of interest between students who have to do openly funded research and an area where we have to do research which is necessarily by its nature of a proprietary format. So there's about 250 people that were there. This is an incubator space for Sentinelle. We've also launched a number of other companies under the same incubator space. Visual Sonics, another tremendous Sunnybrook and Ontario success story that perhaps many of you have heard about. Profound Medical is another one. There's 2 other companies that are in this space. So this has been a tremendous advantage to us in order to initiate this early stage startup process. It's just for commercialization. Our group is able to support this, the real estate, the rent, the heat, the light, and the communications was given to these startup companies for a short period of time while they found their feet, and that was an enormous step forward for them to allow them to succeed and focus on the kind of thing they had to do. So what was the pathway? So the early funding really came from traditional science, federally funded science programs, the CIHR, the National Cancer Institute of Canada, NSERC, provincial organizations. So these bodies funded the basic research that gave us the ideas that we could then take on towards commercialization. The Sentinelle medical imaging system launch, the pre-commercialization funding came from the ORDCF, again a project that many of us in this room have participated in. And this was important because this gave us funds specifically for the purpose of commercialization. It gave us consulting money, money for IP, for legal activity, for development of business models and business plans. This money was invaluable to us. Once the company was formed, this company was funded entirely by private subscription. So several rounds of private investment. In addition, one of the key ingredients is that the founders, really the 3 individuals that I showed you images of, they essentially worked as they lost weight. They were in a starvation process, doing everything they could, working their hearts out very intensely. They're absolutely passionate about this project. They were complete believers in the validity and the importance of this, and I think that passion was a key part of what made this a success. Of course, we organized a licensing agreement with Sunnybrook and used the incubator space that I described. We didn't use venture capital for this, and I think that was really important to motivate the founders to make this thing a success. As was mentioned, this company was sold to Hologic, which is a $5 billion market cap company based out of Boston. It's a perfect marriage between this small company. It was Hologic's first venture into the MRI business, so it was a wonderful strategic alliance between these two. We've had complete staff retention as a result of this purchase, so everything remains exactly the way it was. All the manufacturing, all the R&D was done in Ontario, and it continues to be done there, and there's no reason to think it's going to change. Very important strategic alliance to us. So there's several factors that give rise to success of this kind of project, but I think the most important one that we should take as a takeaway from my presentation is really about the people who made this happen. These were a bunch of very committed, passionate young men and women who worked furiously for many, many years, gave up an awful lot of their life to make this happen, and without them, this success story would not have occurred. So thank you very much.
I made it again. Thank you very much, Don. That was great. Our last speaker is Peter Robertson, and I'm going to just give you a little bio on Peter. Peter Robertson is now Vice President General Manager for GE Healthcare Canada. Now, that is not a small company. In his 25-year-old career, He just turned 26 yesterday. Peter advanced through a progression of leadership roles in sales, marketing, and operations, and was a key contributor to building GE's leadership position in the Canadian healthcare environment. In fact, he sold me my first MRI machine, a 1.5 Tesla GE. Peter became General Manager of Diagnostic Imaging in September 2006, and in 2008 assumed Country Manager responsibility. He currently sits on the boards of MEDEC, that's the Association of Medical Device Companies, and the Center for Probe Development and Commercialization. And it's very nice we could lure him away from his very busy job to give us the view from sort of the top of the ladder on the industrial side. Peter.
Thanks, Dr. Smith. Two very hard acts to follow today, but I'll try and do my best. I thought what I would start by doing is maybe tell you a little bit about the company. I'm sure most of you know about GE. There are still a lot of people who are not aware of our footprint in healthcare, so I thought I would do that. And then talk a little bit about why we're so bullish, I think, about Canada and Ontario in particular when it comes to capacity for innovation and opportunity for investment. So just to start with, GE has a very long, illustrious career or history in Canada. Really started here in 1892. Canada was the first country that GE ever globalized its operations to, starting with an investment in Peterborough, Ontario. And it has really grown from them to a company today in excess of $5 billion in revenues in Canada. The healthcare business itself is about a $400 million business with about 650 employees. It's a pretty broad product portfolio, really concentrated, very broadly based in diagnostics and instrumentation, healthcare information technology, and life sciences products. We also have a very strong service business that has capacity all the way from break-fix to consulting. The strategy of the company is really driven off a major investment that was announced in 2009 called Health Imagination. Health Imagination represents a $6 billion commitment to investment on behalf of the company. By 2015, it is anticipated to result in the development of over 100 intelligent, cost-reduced products that do three things: improve the access to healthcare by 15%, improve the quality of healthcare by 15%, and reduce the cost of delivering healthcare by 15%. One of the other important things you should know about Canada is the company recently reorganized and created a group called Global Growth Operations. Most of the composition of that team is built up of emerging economies. So India, Russia, China, Brazil, very, very strong emerging opportunities. But there are two developed countries that made this list, basically on the strength of their economic fundamentals, rooted in the fact that they are commodity economies. And those are Australia and Canada, right? So very, very strong economic fundamentals that make the company very bullish on the opportunities that we have for growth in the Canadian marketplace. So we continue to be, to be very optimistic about Canada. And when we apply that specifically to the case of healthcare, we especially appreciate the very sophisticated healthcare system and the integration of the healthcare system here, which we believe makes it an ideal petri dish for experimentation. Canada's strength will never be in the size of its market, the absolute size by comparison with India's and China's and Latin America's. But when you look at the capacity for innovation in Canada, we believe there is the wherewithal and the expertise here to innovate at a very high level, to do it in an integrated healthcare system that represents the rest of the world much better than the U.S. healthcare system would, and basically use that as a platform for driving growth globally. And we think that's a model that can be very successful for us here. The recent example I have to share with you on that is the creation that we announced in January of this year of a Pathology Innovation Center of Excellence that is going to be located in the Mars building, just at the corner of University and College. That will open on May 31st and represents, I think, a significant investment for the company in the creation of, to start with, about 15 new jobs, high-tech jobs in the Ontario healthcare sector. The genesis of this was really a process that we go through, a business planning process on an annual basis that really causes us to look externally at what is happening from a public policy perspective. And 2 years ago when we initiated this, we looked out and we saw the terrible stories related to pathology studies that were emerging in New Brunswick, in Newfoundland, in Windsor, Ontario, in Quebec. In fact, that story was so big, the night Minister Flaherty announced the $50 billion deficit, it was a big enough story to knock it out of the lead spot on the national news. And in looking through the company's inventory of innovation, we found a joint venture that we had basically concluded with the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center related to the development of digital pathology systems. We took a good hard look at this in the province of Ontario, and what we found here, we believed, was the perfect collaboratory for the development of this technology. And it was really based, once you had the technology, on three very important factors coming together. A government that was committed to the development of the healthcare sector, a very strong representation of direct clinical partners, and a strong network of clinical collaborators that could help us in the development of the technology. So first and foremost, the group at Omnix identified the pathology group at the University of Health Network, believed they had true thought leadership, were very advanced in terms of some of the early work that they had done in digital pathology, and for us represented an ideal clinical partner for us to tie ourselves to. On top of that, we also looked at the clinical collaborator world and saw in the Ontario Institute for Cancer Research the capacity to, have a partner on board with us who shared a lot of the same interests in terms of developing that technology. And finally, in the Government of Ontario, through the Ministry of Research and Innovation, they were actually tremendous in helping sell the company on the investment in Ontario, and actually, in the final analysis, hooked us up with Health Technology Exchange, the funding arm of the Ministry of Research and Innovation, which actually made an investment in this project. So about a $2.25 million investment from HTX, an initial investment from GE of $7.75 million. That has since virtually doubled, and actually caused us, because of this center that we have here, to invest in one of the successful CECR projects from the last round, the Center for Imaging Technology and Commercialization, which now is going to be working with us and bringing even more Canadian innovation and insight to the development of this very important application. So, I think in that context, when you look at the role of government, the role of the healthcare system in being able to serve as a proof source for your technology investment, and the network of clinical collaborators that are available, we have just tremendously fertile ground in this province. I'm just going to conclude by saying to each of you how important I think the work is that you were involved in, not just coming to this trade show, but for all the companies who were involved in the development of innovative new technologies to assist in healthcare. This province spends $42 billion annually in the provision of healthcare for Ontarians. And, for a long time, I think we've had the lens on that says, for $42 billion, if I can do a good job of looking after the health of the people who live in this province, that's probably okay. Well, I'm not sure that it is okay. $42 billion is a big spend. And you would think that for $42 billion, you could not only look after Ontarians, but also attract new investment into the Ontario economy, bring new jobs to the Ontario economy, as the manufacturing sector will continue to be impacted by the rise of the dollar. And it's not just enough to be able to deliver on the healthcare agenda. This is a fundamental piece of the economic agenda for the province. And we have tremendous capacity here, tremendous opportunity for growth in driving that innovation agenda. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'll turn things back over to Dr. Smith.
Peter has always called me Dr. Smith. I hope soon he'll call me Ian. Anyway, we've come to the part of the program now where we ask questions from the audience. And we have a microphone there for you to ask your question. And Who would like to ask the first question? I'm going to go and sit down over there when we do that. There's one. Please come to the microphone. Okay, and I'm going to disappear. Share these.
Okay. A fascinating success story. Congratulations. Very glad to see that U of T engineering was critical in the success. My interest and passion is systemic failure analysis. So, Dr. Plewes, I think maybe the question is directed towards you. Obviously, this product has to work, cannot have failures in the field. Do you recall what systemic failure analysis was done during the development?
Yeah, there was an extensive period of testing analysis of all the mechanical features and the electrical features that we had to go through to get the regulatory approvals we needed for Health Canada and for the FDA. So there is a fairly well-defined set of criterion that were given to us for essentially stressing the mechanical features that we would have as this device would move back and forth within the MRI scanner, exposing the electronic components to over voltages and isolation questions. So a fair bit of energy was spent actually documenting that, actually developing the technology for doing the testing itself. We had to build these little robot things that would do this thing over and over again, and we just kept doing it until it broke and looked at what the number was, and that was the number that we would then submit to the appropriate authorities. Yeah, so there was a fair bit of energy spent on that kind of activity.
Next question, please.
Yeah, a question regarding GE innovation. How are these innovations coordinated globally? And what does Canada do independent of that? Or is it all coordinated en masse?
Yeah, it is coordinated centrally. It's coordinated through the Global Research Center. One of the advantages of, I think for us now, having, really what it is it's a contract research organization that sits within the company, right? So it's composed of about 22 research institutes that really covers the full, spectrum of different industrial sectors that we're involved in. So I think out of healthcare, there are 4 or 5 institutes that are really relevant to what we do in healthcare. So all of that is coordinated centrally by someone who is looking out globally as a chief technology officer for all of the investment that we do make in healthcare. Now, our plan is with the investment in Mars, is actually to take someone from that organization and have them positioned here in Ontario. We think that's a great first place to do, and I'm sure it won't be the last, but a good first place for us to get a very broad kind of perspective on all of the technology and innovation that's starting to emerge in the province.
Please.
Thank you to all the panelists. My question is to Dr. Plewes. When you were in the process of commercializing the MRI coils, you said that you had you made some critical partnerships with some big players such as GE, Siemens, Toshiba. What I want to ask is how hard was it to actually make these partnerships? And if I guess the other panelists could also respond, such as Peter, what are you looking for from new medical device manufacturers when they come to you with the new innovative technologies? What do you use to assess them, and how do you, what are the terms of the partnership, I guess, and how hard is it in reality to make these partnerships?
Well, the first partnership we had actually was with GE and my colleague here. And in fact, we designed the system originally around the magnet we had, which was a GE magnet. So we had a very deep understanding of the engineering of the GE magnet and all the details of it. So it was quite easy for us to do. Once it was out of being a science project and it looked like it was a real thing, GE Canada in particular was extremely helpful in facilitating, and in fact was critical to facilitating our first really series of sales. It happened in Canada first. And it's ironic to think that you would say, well, wouldn't you go to sell these things in the United States? In fact, we sold them all around Toronto first, then Southern Ontario. The way you think it ought to be actually is what happened. And then it migrated into the United States. GE was our first partner in that sense, and really through Sunnybrook has had a relationship with GE for 30, 25 years. So we all know each other quite well. So it was actually it was a fairly easy thing to do. As we began to work with other companies such as Siemens and Mitsubishi, we just didn't know them as well. So it was a bit less, a little more formal at the outset. But I think the thing that was important was that the particular business that we were looking at was so small by comparison to the kind of things that Peter normally thinks about and his counterparts in Siemens normally think about. The MRI business is gigantic compared to what we were doing. In a sense, we were helping them by allowing them to facilitate more sales of their products with something that we took the risk of developing and essentially handed it to them. So it actually wasn't that difficult a process to go through.
Can I add something to that? Yeah, if I could just add to that, because from the other side of that same equation, it was actually very interesting. I think what we find a lot of the time are technologies or devices in desperate search of an application, right? Could be a very, very interesting engineering project. But I think, you know, from my recollection, what really differentiated Sentinelle was they came to GE with a very well-articulated value proposition. And what I mean by that is the data on the clinical problem was very clear, it was very conclusive, and the economic impact of that was very easy to trace, right? It was a very direct line. So, you know, in a case like that, where you've got very, very clear clinical data and you've got a very, very clear economic impact, it makes things much easier to attract the attention of a large company. So.
I can add something on the, we work with distribution partners, both for distributing our products internationally and then importing products from companies around the world. And one of the things we most often look at is two things really, is the company about the same size as us. If they're much smaller or much bigger, there's usually a difference in infrastructure that makes it very difficult to interact and work with. Second thing is are they calling on the same call points? What's their familiarity with surgeon specialists, with the products that we're making, the products they're used to selling? Because if that synergy is not there, then especially in med tech, where there's a very specific knowledge base, you have to be speaking the same language. So we're really looking for companies that are the same size and are talking to the very specific types of physicians that we're used to dealing with.
My question is for Neil. You had mentioned that your company didn't have the resources in the beginning to do extensive clinical studies and so forth. My company's struggling with evidence-based practice to convince, you know, healthcare practitioners of the merits of our product. So what are the things that you did do? Because obviously you had to do something.
Yeah, that's a good point. So there's really two types of clinical trials that you can undertake. There are those that are required by regulatory agencies, depending on the classification of your device. And that's, if you're a small company, you really don't want to be down that regulatory pathway. It's extremely expensive and very risky. But there's a second tier of research, you know, which is really talking about really as a marketing tool. And there really isn't a better place to be than Southern Ontario. There's a huge infrastructure of surgeons who are world-class specialists in all sorts of medicine. We haven't broached a field of medicine yet where we haven't been able to find a local talent, and you'd be surprised how open universities are to working with you, and research institutions like Sunnybrook. We have at least 4 separate research projects going on with Sunnybrook right now, and even when we were very small, part of it is just getting out there, finding a surgeon specialist, or depending on the product you're making, saying, you know, I have an interesting thing, I really like to do research with you. Getting connected with groups like HTX, OCE, we've done many projects with them as well to get the financing together. Working through the process. The first one's the hardest, just because it's there's a lot of things that are new to you, the protocols and proposals. Once you get through one, the researchers are actually just as motivated as you to publish results. And if your product works and the device makes sense, you know, they'll be inclined to publish that, and then, you know, it kind of works from there. And that's in fact how we started. We started with one, and once we understood the mechanics, we were able to do the second, third, fourth, and so on. And we've probably published close to 40 or 50 papers without our name on it, but you know, been intrinsically involved with that, starting in Ontario, and now we've worked with all the major hospitals around the world, Johns Hopkins or, you know, Cleveland Clinic or wherever. But it ultimately comes down to just getting in front of the researchers, showing a common interest. If they're there and they're interested, they'll find a way to work with you.
Any other questions? Well, then I have one. It's mostly for Neil. Nobody has really talked about venture capital. The problem most startup companies have is they can't find enough money to go forward from, let's say, the prototype they make in the lab. They need, let's say, $10, $20 million to do some trials and so on. And how did you manage to avoid that phase? Both of you. Peter had a big bank there in the United States, I guess. I don't know how you guys fund yourselves, but Don did it privately. How did you guys do it?
Well, we did it a couple of ways. So one, we had a distribution business already ongoing for 10 years, so that gave us some revenue. But actually, subsequent to that, we tried to think of projects as if we were a VC-funded company. I think one thing is in Ontario, there's a lot of resources here, so your actual spend can be a lot less than if you did do a VC route. So when you hear VC companies talking about needing 20, 30, 40 millions to get going, you got to keep in mind a lot of that is expensive infrastructure. They have to have a certain burn rate. They have to hit certain milestones. They're going for a very specific growth path, which is highly accelerated, and they have to hit home run projects. So they're developing products that have to hit a massive milestone. So you can't go to a VC and say, I'm interested in a $500,000 market. They'll just show you the front door and kick you right out. You can't take small bets with VC. We specialize in small bets. Our favorite saying in the office is that we hit singles. So if we see someone trying to hit a double, we reel them back in and have them stick at first base. So keeping the risk small reduces the spend, it reduces the regulatory risk, reduces the technology risk, and you can do it for a lot less than that. And then it's a matter of the sweat equity and piecing together the different parts, finding intelligent ways of doing things. But it can be done for much, much less, as I'm sure Don will tell you, than the tens or 20s million that you'll commonly hear in VC markets.
Yeah, the other problem, of course, is the VC wants you to be finished in 3 years.
That's right.
So they get their money back times 3. But it's still, I think, quite a problem for startup companies in general to get the momentum that's big enough to satisfy somebody who's going to come along with big money.
If I could just add something to that, I think that one of the things that's unique about the healthcare sector, and that's also unique in the academic healthcare sector, and perhaps even more so in Ontario, is that I really believe that there's a critical role that academic healthcare centers like at the University of Toronto and Western Ontario and Ottawa throughout the province play a vital role in developing the technology. But since they're in the healthcare sector, in some sense, they have the patients. They don't have to go out for them. They have them in their own institution, as opposed to you had to go find a relationship with a partner in sick kids. If you're already in the institution, you're usually working with somebody who helped you make the technology in the first place. And since you're in an academic institution, there's various sources of funding you can get through more traditional science methods and these academic industrial partnership kinds of funds, POP grants, similar kinds of things that you can then use to build those prototypes. And then you do as much of the clinical testing as you can under the academic umbrella. And then, as Peter says, once you've published your papers that show definitively this is what this means, there's no question about it, it means this, then it's much easier to go raise money privately because you don't have to go do the testing, because much of that expensive part's already done. So I think that it's not said maybe clearly enough, the vital role between the academic institute-based research enterprise and its relationship to industry is absolutely vital to move this thing forward. Without the academic side, it won't work, because I think it's very difficult in the industrial setting to dream up a clinical idea in the absence of having physicians and patients around the corner.
Just to add to that, I think there is a problem though with the VC market in Ontario. That being said, I think a couple of wins like Sentinelle and hopefully like Baylis will both educate the VC community to bring more funding to local markets. I think with more wins, more companies being successful in Ontario, they'll be hopefully draw some of the VC money here. Where quite honestly, we have as many quality companies and researchers here as anywhere else in the world, and I think with time it'll come. It's a bit of a chicken and egg thing too.
I didn't mention it, but at Sunnybrook there's 3 or 4 other companies that are sort of in the pipeline right now. and 2 of those are currently funded by VC. So Visual Sonics was funded by VC, and it was very successful. It worked out very well. Another one, Profound, is still in the process of undergoing its program, also VC funded. So it's not as if it can't happen. It can happen, but you have to choose the partners very, very carefully.
The one element that I see in common in you 3 fellows and your stories is this passion thing. Lots of passion. You know, and we're the same. We love what we do, and we are willing to break your back, so to speak. The sweat equity part is very important. If you don't really believe in what you're doing, you're not going to succeed. So I think this is a good point to say thank you to everybody. It's a wonderful spectrum we had of involvement in the market. And now I'll call on Don Duval would like to say a few words.
Well, thank you for attending. Just to echo a couple of the last of Ian's comments, especially with the Baylis and Sentinelle stories. It is truly inspirational for all would-be or existing entrepreneurs to see the, exceptional accomplishments that these 2 companies have achieved in the grand scheme of things in the world of life sciences in a relatively short period of time. The life sciences community, especially from a venture capital perspective, as many of you know, is exceptionally challenging, not only in Ontario but Canada more broadly. So these are inspiring stories. These are the things that I think are absolutely exceptional, and we should promote to get the other community members and researchers engaged to pursue this dream. In addition to that, the role that GE Healthcare, they're here in Canada and Ontario specifically for strong recognition that we have exceptional research assets in this community, and their role in the supply chain to help us with the commercialization pathway and get these products to market, to help out from an economic perspective, but also that pull to give these entrepreneurs a strong sense of opportunity. Again, from an ecosystem perspective, this is exceptional. So with that, I would like to thank our panelists, Neil Godara, Donald Plewes, and Peter Robertson for spending their time today and providing their valuable insights. And in particular, I would like to thank Ian Smith for moderating an excellent discussion. I will present to them a small token of appreciation, but I'll let the group disband. But before we do that, I would also like to take the opportunity here to once again thank Gowlings for their sponsorship of this wonderful, wonderful space that we have here. And with that, that concludes the panel discussion. As they say, we save the best for last. And hopefully you enjoyed it. And I believe the closing ceremony will begin momentarily at the main amphitheater just to my left, to your right. So enjoy the afternoon, and thanks for coming.